Okay, so I'm going to give you guys a quick introduction. Let's start with Paul. Paul is the CEO and founder of Horangi Cybersecurity. Paul has over a decade of experience and expertise in anti-money laundering, insider threats, cybersecurity, government, and commercial banking. Paul leads a team of cybersecurity specialists who create software that solve challenging cybersecurity problems by bringing together world-class cybersecurity solutions to the Asian market. And Linda is the program head of I-71. I-71 is the region's first cybersecurity entrepreneur hub. It aims to strengthen Singapore's growing cybersecurity ecosystem by attracting and developing competencies and deep technologies to help mitigate the rapidly increasing cybersecurity risks across the region. So with that, I'm going to transition this over to Linda, who will be moderating this next panel. Thank you both for joining. Linda, over to you.
All right, great. Thanks so much for the introduction, Theo. And hello, everyone. Welcome to the Frontlines 2021, the Bull Run for Cyber Startups conversation, brought to you by Right Hand Cybersecurity. So as Theo said, I'm Lyndon Wen-Schindler, the program head at I-71, which stands for Innovation Cybersecurity Ecosystem at Block 71 in Singapore. It was founded by leading university, the National University of Singapore, NUS, and leading VC Singtel Innovate. And we are the region's first cybersecurity entrepreneur hub and NUS Enterprise's first dedicated cybersecurity startup ecosystem builder. So again, with me today, we have Paul Haji, CEO and co-founder of Horangi. So Paul, hi, nice to see you again.
Thanks, Linda.
All right, so I think, Theo shared a bit about your background, but is there anything else about you that you would like the audience to know?
Yeah, so obviously now I'm in the role of building products for cybersecurity, but before this I was actually running the security team for Grab. So I have quite a bit of experience on the other side of the gun, so to say. And before that, I was at Palantir for 7 years, where I spent a lot of time sort of solving cybersecurity problems at large institutions, as well as any money laundering and intelligence ones, as Theo mentioned earlier. And a bit about Horangi, I think, just to dig into more to what we do. Our product helps companies secure their public cloud infrastructure. So it's integrated with AWS, GCP, Azure, Ali Cloud, and Huawei Cloud. Essentially helps companies secure their public and multi-cloud infrastructure. Yeah.
All right. So, I mean, look, you're a veteran in the cybersecurity industry with all of, the background that you just mentioned. So you worked in multiple countries. I see like US, Korea, New Zealand, right? More. So out of curiosity, what factors led you to choose Singapore as your startup base?
Yeah, so funny story. I think, so it's one of the countries you didn't mention, but, a country where I spent a year of my life was Afghanistan. So I was there for Palantir for about a year, working on some intelligence and cybersecurity problems. And while I was in Kandahar, met a Singaporean armed forces person who was using Palantir on the NATO network. And essentially was asking for help and support of bringing it here or there, because I'm in the US right now. Yeah, so that brought Palantir to Singapore, and had some good initiatives that eventually brought me to Singapore. And then I was at Palantir and actually ended up being in New Zealand after about 4 years of Singapore, and then got the opportunity to Grab and wanted to come back after a quick 7 months in New Zealand.
Yeah, but I mean, you could have chosen anywhere then, right? You had all this experience everywhere, all these hot markets. Like, is there a reason why you chose to come back to Singapore to start your company?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity. Like while I was at Grab, this would have been 2016. So I was kind of looking for help with sort of a modern company. So I was looking out for solutions globally that would solve what I guess Grab started in 2013, but completely built on modern technology in the clouds. And none of the vendors or even the SIs in the region at the time really understood how to kind of solve the problems we were facing. So I had to go to the US to work with a lot of those vendors. Got lucky with some of them like Jump Cloud and others, but wanted to work with local vendors as much as I could, and couldn't find any, and saw there's an opportunity to solve the problems that we're doing now in the cloud, and focus on the region as well.
I mean, great, right? You saw the opportunity here and you came back. I mean, so I think when we're talking about ecosystem, I think engagement with the entrepreneurial ecosystem is vital for the industry, right? So, because startups are often the source of innovation. Small companies, they start off with an idea and a problem they want to solve. It's easy for them to focus on these problems because they don't have, so many customers at the time. And when we look at cybersecurity startups, they're agile, they can shift to address emerging threats quicker. They're developing next generation technology to address challenges that are to come. So during our time in the ecosystem, I've seen Harangi ever expanding into the cybersecurity space in this region, right? It's now approaching 6 years, you said? Is it?
Yeah, almost 6, yeah.
Yeah. So what is the biggest difference you see between being a cybersecurity startup today and 6 years ago? I mean, aside from having I-71 here to support startups, of course.
Yeah. I think there's a lot more support. I mean, in a lot of ways, there's a couple of companies that have been around for quite a while. I think people even still view the U.S. and Israeli companies as the best in breed in terms of cybersecurity. Whether that's true or not, they do view it that way. But I think that's part of the challenge that we faced a lot more back then, just because there wasn't an ecosystem to kind of support local sort of growth in the space. But of course, programs like I-71, which Harangi participates in, as well as many other sort of companies that have kind of come out and been somewhat successful, have kind of eased the sort of path. I think that's happening across industries too. So it's not just cybersecurity. I think that happened, with a lot of the successes of the other tech companies in the region. But I definitely think back then, talking to the venture capitalists about the cybersecurity, they're like, "Well, why didn't you start the company in the US?" I was like, "Well, because I wanted to, solve the problems of the region." And they're like, "Yeah, but you should, the US is where all the great cybersecurity companies are made." And I was like, "Yeah, but that's why I'm trying to change it." And I think it's always hard when you're the first or one of the first to kind of focus on the problem or a specific region. And you have to explain yourself. I mean, going through the experience at Palantir was no different. The problem they were trying to solve back in 2004 when the company started was no one really believed that they would be able to do what they did. And it took them a long time too. It took them 17 years to go public and kind of get to where they're at today. But it took a lot of early believers to kind of make big bets and truly believe that this was solvable. And we were lucky enough to get those. And I feel grateful for that, and also feel super passionate about supporting the community because want to make sure that we pay it forward and are doing things that make it easier for everyone else that's coming up in the space.
Right. I mean, in the ecosystem, in terms of building it up, obviously, I think the big MNCs, right, the big companies, the CISOs are going to play an important role in helping to build that ecosystem, and because they're constantly going to be in the lookout for emerging trends and threats for their organization. So their active involvement in the ecosystem helps them to stay up to date with all the solutions. But on the other side of it, they face unique cybersecurity challenges, like startups can be ready to jump on the challenges and create solutions. For example, CSA in Singapore, the cybersecurity agency, has the industry call for innovation, which offers up to $1 million to find innovative solutions, right? So we're trying to find different ways to engage companies and startups. So how do you think that these CISOs and these companies in the ecosystem can contribute? What can they do to help? And how big of a role do they play in your growth? Or how have you chosen your path of growth?
Yeah, I think there's a couple questions in there, and I'm going to try and give kind of sort of perspectives from both sides because I have been a CISO previously as well. I think from the CISO perspective, there's certain areas in your sort of security infrastructure where you may not want to take bets because of the risk involved. And you may want to just choose something that's kind of proven in the space. But there are definitely certain areas where your problem may be unique, or maybe you need some bit more customization that, frankly, US or Israeli vendor is just not going to provide to an Asian company. And that's, I think, where it makes a lot of sense for even large companies to invest in working with a local or regional partner that does care about you, right? I think we see this time and time again. And I think this is one of our biggest differentiators is the focus on Asia and the focus on our customers here, right? Because if you look at any US public cybersecurity company, when you look at their percentage of revenue that comes from Asia, it's almost always less than 10%. Actually, always less than 10%. I don't think there's any of them that have more than 10% that I know of. And then, less than 5% for the majority of them, right? So when you think about that from their perspective, in terms of if an Asian customer has a feature request, Sure, maybe they'll get around to it, sometime in the next couple of years, but it's definitely not their priority because they have to cater to where their revenue is, right? Which is understandable as well. So I think from that aspect, if there's areas where you as a CISO can experiment, or maybe your problem is a bit more unique than something that's built for a US or extremely large a US company or extremely large enterprise, you can experiment a bit. And I think startups are the best place to work with that. And I think that, generally in my experience in working with some of them at Grab, they are going to, sort of push results a lot faster than a large company would do, and also take more care, as well as give better support, right? So I think from that aspect, lots of advantages. And then on the company side, sort of building to that, you got to find the right people. It is hard, and you probably get a lot more no's than you will yeses. I'd say probably 9 no's for every 1 yes. So 1 out of 10 might say yes for you. And a lot of them might like you and be interested, but from their perspective, they're managing risk. And if that problem is, one where they don't feel comfortable taking the risk on you as a startup, or, maybe they don't need the customization in that front, then they might not take it. But I think that is just repeatedly going to them, being good about the problems that you solve, providing value as fast as possible, and kind of integrating as much as you can within those organizations to continue solving their problems. And the money will come if you're solving their problems. But sometimes you have to do things for free, and no one likes to do that, but it's part of the game.
Yeah, that's tough, right? How do you get a CISO to buy into a startup when they could say, hey, why don't I just get an off-the-shelf solution? You might close up at any point in time. Harangi doesn't have that problem anymore. Now you're an established player. But I think these are one of the problems that the CISOs have to think about, right? So talking about the issues that CISOs have to deal with. We've seen so many major cybersecurity attacks globally. They're disrupting the food supply chain, fuel prices, and all of these high impact attacks have captivated the organization's attentions, right? And they're more willing to invest in cybersecurity in their organizations. But this kind of opens up, I guess, a new set of problems. CISOs are now facing a new dilemma in that, how do they navigate through all the vendors offering a multitude of solutions, right? How do they do that? And how do they quantify that ROI to the organization?
Yeah. Again, not a perfect problem to solve here. I don't think there's a perfect answer either, but some of it has to do with risk. Is this the most important problem for you? And budget, right? So oftentimes you won't have enough budget to acquire the best product in the space just because it's too expensive. Then you got to think about the one thing that I'm always talking to our customer about is most of our competitors will be huge US companies that are built for large banks with huge teams of cybersecurity people, right? And you got to think about okay, yeah, the product is going to be similar in cost, but what is it going to cost to staff it, right? And I think that's something that not a lot of people think about. Definitely the larger organizations will, but if you buy some super fancy cybersecurity product, but you don't have the team that can run it, not really useful. Even if it is the same price as a similar solution, but much easier to use, right? So I think there's a lot of sort of thoughts that you need to go through and kind of work with your team and the budget that you're given as a CISO to figure out. But there's a lot of tools out there to help you too. There is Gartner. Gartner is useful to get at least a landscape of what's actually happening in the space. Who are some of the up and comers? Who are some of the established players? If it's a newer category like what we're in, usually we'll put out a list of these are the companies doing innovative things in the space. These are the mature players, those types of things. And I find that quite useful. And you can Google most of that stuff, but obviously if your company has a Gartner prescription, it's helpful as well. And that's a good way to kind of get the understanding. But then in my opinion, there's no better sort of test than using it, right? Most of the cybersecurity companies these days will provide you with a trial. And if the product is good, they should be quite confident about giving you that trial. So I think in reality, it's the best way to test it, and your team can test their understanding of it, which again, I think is one of the more important pieces. There's no point in buying a F1 race car if you don't have an F1 race car driver, right? It's just the reality of the situation with, I think some of the other subjects folks were talking about was just the lack of cybersecurity professionals, right? So that's a constant struggle for everyone. And yeah, no point in having a F1 car if you just need a Volvo. Yeah.
Hey, Volvos is still pretty good, but I mean,
Yeah,
I
actually I
think
like Volvos, but
you
that's
bring
why
up
it
a
popped in
good
my head.
you bring up a good point. I think they're going to discuss that in the next panel about the talent shortage, and you can't just keep on spending money on cybersecurity and then not have a team to actually help you use it. But I guess that, what you're saying brings us up to another interesting question. So as we're talking about all of these solutions that the CISOs and the companies are inundated with and all these vendors, so then what should cybersecurity startups do? I mean, this is an arms race. Both sides, the hackers and the defenders, their weapons and defenses are constantly evolving. New techniques keep on cropping up. And cybersecurity companies are trying to predict their next moves, defend against them. So for cybersecurity startups, I mean, should they focus on specialized solutions? Should they go into hyper specialization or multi-solution ones that cover a wide range of verticals?
Yeah. I mean, I think this question too, there's no perfect answer. I think like in both cases, there's been successful companies built out. Generally, I would say the bigger ones are going to be ones that don't focus, and they do build out platforms. So you can see that with like Palo Alto, Prisma, which is essentially a cloud security platform. There's like Wiz and Orca and these other cloud security platforms that, they're building platforms, right? Because like there's more than one problem to solve in the space. I think the same thing with EDRs. They start off with just EDR, but then they kind of like grow into other areas of security as they grow. And I think this also has to do with the reason why I think the platform is the better play if you're trying to build like the biggest or best company, is because actually, in my opinion, one of the hardest problems in software is actually integrating different pieces of software together. And security is there's so many different softwares, there's so many different pieces of data that need to be congregated. And if you can control that somewhat, at least within a specific space, so if you're doing cloud, or if you're doing source code or whatever, it's just a lot easier for larger companies, especially, to manage that problem set. And you'll find yourself getting pulled into analogous spaces quite quickly, even if you are just focused on one thing. But I mean, plenty of companies also have been very focused on one specific problem. I would say the majority of those are going to get acquired, but that's not a bad outcome for anyone either. And you'll see. I mean, I don't know how many acquisitions have already happened this year, but it's in the 70s or 80s. And these are all $80, $100 million acquisitions. Again, majority US companies, but that is another path, and potentially a good path as well.
Yeah. So what's Harangi's play in this?
So we're building a cloud security platform. So we started with cloud security posture management, which essentially is looking at the security and compliance configurations in the public cloud, and that's why we're in the top 5 on that front. Then we got into cloud identity and entity management, which is actually looking at all the different accesses to your public cloud infrastructure and data, from individuals, but also from third parties, whether you've built integrations into your cloud infrastructure. And that one's a super hot space, and we just got listed in Gartner for that last week. The third one we just launched, which is threat detection, which is more monitoring of specific actions happening across those two, but across your cloud in general, looking for actual live threats instead of things that have kind of been misconfigured by the organization or third parties as well. And I mean, those 3 are kind of what we did in terms of research with our customers and Gartners. And we got pulled out of our first sort of core piece, which was CSPM. But ultimately, I think it's worked a lot better because it makes our offering more holistic and provides a full source solution for our customers, which I think is more powerful and does get more dollars as well.
Okay. So then I guess, in talking about, where you guys have chosen to focus, what emerging trends do you foresee that will change up the cybersecurity industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm sure you guys have been hearing about this for the past 5 to 10 years, but when you look at cloud, it's still growing so fast. And Asia's growing actually 3 or 4 times faster than the rest of the world from a lower base. But I think we are still at the beginning of the growth of the cloud sort of adoption from Asian enterprises. Obviously, we have the sort of tech company boom, which almost all of them are built in the cloud. But now the more traditional enterprises maybe have been dabbling a bit, but are really starting to move their infrastructure to the cloud. And I think that's a really exciting space, lots of problems to solve. And then, like, as you mentioned, there's like, I mean, all of the different CSPs are releasing new technologies all the time. So there's so many new things that come up in every situation that are need to be solved. And I think there's a lot of exciting problems to solve there. So that's like one thing I'm excited about. Yeah, I also think like the other problem I mentioned, which is the integrations, is one that I've seen a couple companies kind of touching on, but it's something that you know, will continue to grow, and it's a huge space to be in, which is, you know, I don't know if anyone knows what Zapier is, but essentially allows software to integrate together and move the data around. But there's some companies coming up in the same space for security, which essentially helps provide that integration layer between a lot of the different security tools, which I think is a hugely powerful space, and some huge companies will be built out of that also. And then there's API stuff, like everyone's using API for everything, and like there's ways to secure it, but you can't really be perfect. And there's lots of interesting things you can do with technology to reduce the risk there. And some cool companies coming out in that space too, but still quite nascent. And I think lots of interesting ones to come as well.
So going back to cloud, I mean, everyone's talking about this. I mean, is it like automatic, or is there resistance to this, do you think, at this point?
I think there's still resistance, you know, and a lot of it comes just with, from your, let's say you're a traditional enterprise and you have like a 300-person IT team. You know, none of them are probably going to be trained on cloud if you haven't already sort of started segmenting that way. And all the tech companies are stealing all the people that are good at cloud as well. So like it presents quite a challenge, I think, for a traditional company to make that move. There's also like, there's a whole finance aspect of it, like understanding like how the purchasing is different, how you like sort of predict costs and through the long term, which can be scary because they've been purchasing hardware, you know, for the past who knows how long, 30, 40 years in a specific cycle that, you know, is a bit more different. And there's like a sort of a way for them to, you know, discount it over time also. So I think there's a lot of challenges. And I don't think everyone's going to move fast. But I think in the next 10 years, I think we'll basically switch that. Majority of the companies are going to be predominantly cloud. And it may happen even faster than that. But in Asia, I think it'll take 10. And then like, yeah, I mean, once that happens, then I think a majority of the growth will start moving over.
Okay. I mean, yeah, it seems inevitable, but of course, there's always resistance to change, especially in the large organizations. But I mean, I guess talking about trends, that kind of leads me to talking about startups and funding. I guess we can talk about this in a trend. So we're looking at major cyber attacks are happening all the time. So cybersecurity is a hot topic, right? Top of mind for a lot of folks. And according to Momentum Cyber's market review, investors poured in $11.5 billion in total revenue capital financing into cybersecurity startups in the first half of 2021, up from $4.6 billion in the same period a year earlier. Here we have Singapore Temasek leading a US $550 million funding round in Israel's Orca Security, right? So we're talking again about US and Israel, like people always looking there for these. So why do you think we don't see this kind of investment in Singapore cybersecurity startups? Like what do you see on the horizon? Like, do you think this is changing, shifting in the near future?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to take time, and I think it's a bit disappointing, to be honest with you, that like, you know, like obviously like there's plenty of great companies in this region that you know, a lot of the big funds can take, but you know, I mean, I understand it's just like anything, change takes time, and it takes like a few sort of you know, the early sort of focused people to kind of like bust through that. But I think it's going to take time. Like I think the reality is like, you know, whether the perception is true or not is like one question, and you know, I'm sure there's plenty of different opinions on that. But like the perception is there regardless, and it will take time, and success stories that, you know, maybe aren't as heavily venture capital backed, but have grown to interesting and large companies, or have gotten acquired at good multiples, to take the VCs in the region to kind of invest fiercely. And I mean, VCs in the region, I think, is one thing, but actually, I think for the ecosystem to really take root, they need to get money from other regions. I think that's when it's really gonna sort of like explode, and like we'll be in some of the sort of similar ranges what you're seeing kind of in the fintech and the B2C space. But even if you look at B2B in this region, there's not really many B2B companies that are kind of getting those big funding rounds outside of India. So it's not that much different, I think, in B2B, and cybersecurity is, ultimately a subsegment of that. But cybersecurity is hard, right? Like there's not that many experts that we've touched on, and I'm sure they'll touch on in future panels today. But yeah, so like, I mean, even people not being able to recognize like what's good or not is quite difficult as well. And yeah, like when you talk to the US side of things, like they, there are many US companies that do what a local company does, most likely. So like, yeah, the question comes like, why would I not invest in the company in the bigger market? Which, is a fair question to ask from the venture capitalist perspective too. And yeah, I think it's hard, right? And it'll take time, but it will happen. Like just like it happened in the B2C space and the sort of fintech space, but I think it will be five years or more.
And have you experienced your conversations like changing around like investors or in folks around you around here? I mean, has that conversation changed in the last 6 years since you started and between then and now?
But definitely there's a lot more interest. But I still think the hurdles exist of like, we don't understand it. It's like the biggest one. Like Asia, like doesn't spend nearly as much money on cybersecurity as like the US and other regions. So it's like a problem that is real, and like there's just numbers around that. So I think that's challenging too. Yeah, so still see it. It's gotten better though, as we mentioned. So I think like early stage stuff, like I think a lot of people are sort of putting money in, but as you get more mature, of course, like the metrics matter more. And like the whole GTM side of cyber is really hard because of basically the problems we've talked about previously, which is like there's just a lot of competition. How do you stand out? Like you're not from US or Israel, so like what do you do that's like different from them? And like, okay, if I'm going to spend money on this, like why would I go with you versus like a US company? Like what's your differentiation from them, and how are you going to help solve my problems? You have really good answers for those, and then you need to do it a lot of times, because you have to have a lot of revenue to get to the scale, and it's hard in Asia. So I think, yeah, like it'll take time, but like as the spending goes up, as the cloud growth goes up for these companies, I think it's bound to happen. It's just like, yeah, I just don't think it's going to happen over the next couple of years. I think it'll take.
All right. Well, I mean, I guess last question then, since we run out of time. If you were to start Harangi again with the current landscape, would you still choose to start up here in Singapore?
I think, I mean, now, probably not, just because, like, I think like there's plenty of mature companies in the space. I think at the time, like, I think it's a good decision. We built a lot of great relationships with companies in the region, and solved a lot of hard problems in terms of what we're building. And I think, we are competitive in certain spaces, and especially in the region in terms of like regionalization and kind of solving the problems, and even in segments, which is actually like where we're winning in the US and other markets. So I think that's kind of like what you can do from a perspective is like, and what we see is interesting. The Asian enterprise looks a lot like a mid-market company in the US. And that's kind of like been our selling point, is like making basically the product easy to use, solving problems easily, and basically replacing headcount that you may not have, and using kind of your IT team to solve the security problems as much as possible. And that's kind of like really like our sort of a differentiator. And I think a lot of companies can do that because, again, like because of Asia's sort of severe lack of expertise and is maturing a bit slower, like that kind of sort of segment fits the US and other markets a bit lower than the enterprise quite well.
Okay, well, to me, all I hear is it sounds like so much opportunity here.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So, well, I mean, thank you so much again for sharing your insights. I think, the audience has benefited from a lot. And to the audience out there, thank you so much for your time, and hope you enjoyed the conversation. So if you'd like to continue to hear about these conversations in cybersecurity, obviously you can learn more at i71.sg and join our community. But other than that, I'm going to hand the conversation over now to Theo and the folks at Right Hand Security. But until next time, stay safe and enjoy the rest of the Frontlines 2021.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.